As sentient beings, we find ourselves thrown into a world that inflicts immense pain and suffering. So having the option of a graceful exit should be seen as a basic, universal human right. Since our existence is better to never have been, we should all have the right to die. Welcome to The Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast, featuring your hosts, Danny, Kevin, and Amanda. In this show, we attempt to change the perception of society's views of voluntary euthanasia and what true autonomy could look like.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right to No Longer Exist, the Right to Die podcast. We are here on our 5th episode, and we're trucking along again. And we are happy and grateful to have a special guest on, Anton. He's a YouTuber, and he speaks amazing things, usually about stuff in Canada and what's going on with legislation there, but also just talks about all different other issues, slippery slope issues, just arguments in general for the right to die. And I like how he brings up actually other arguments that are against the right to die and talks about that, which is always a good conversation to have. So we're grateful to have you on. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to actually be on here. It's good to have allies in the fight for the right to die. And even though we're just across the border, where it's very similar between Canada and the United States. So yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking before the recording how, it's so important to have so much more people talking about it, because it does kind of show in other people's faces that aren't exposed to it that this is an issue that's been going on for a whole long time. But even in 30 years where there is a death with dignity here and there, just how much that lacks and how much advancements that need to be made for that, I assume all of us would agree. But yeah, if you would just, Anton, please share with us anything about yourself whatsoever you're comfortable with, and how you ultimately got to be so interested in the right to die as well.
For sure, yeah. So it was I think 2016. I was what was going on? I don't remember exactly what was happening in my life, but I'm pretty sure I was pretty bummed out. And I saw this news, or I read this news. Canada is implementing MAID legislation, medical assistance in dying. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And it blew my mind that it was happening. And I just never thought within my lifetime that something like this would happen. I always thought that whoever they are, would be holding us back as a society from advancing in this regard. And I'm wary about labeling whoever they are, because it's not like everybody that's religious is against it, or everybody that's conservative is against it and whatnot. So I just learning that recently. But yeah, it got passed. That bill got passed, and I started learning more about it. I learned that this woman named Carter sued the government and worked her way all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court judges agreed with her on every point in her argument, and they passed it on. That their job is just to go with the case, to come up with a judgment. They don't actually make the law. And then they pass that on to the branch of government that makes the laws, that actually writes the laws. And they say, okay, here you go. You guys need to change the law so that people can assist one another in their dying. That's essentially it. And their logic was, it's cruel to force people into positions like what Carter was in, where they have to turn to risky, violent, inhumane ways of dying, or they have to live on and suffer intolerably until they die of natural causes. So yeah, when that happens in 2016, well, that didn't happen in 2016. The court case happened earlier than that. But in 2016, the law was passed, the very first made legislation, and it got legalized, and the wording was very vague. And it was intentionally vague. It was vague so that it wouldn't piss off as many people. And, you know, when you ask a politician a question, you watch them, and they give these super smoke and mirrors answers, whether it's like, do you agree or disagree with this? Well, it's like, could you just give a straight answer? So anyway, the law was not straight, okay? It was like, you're dying in the reasonably foreseeable future. You get access to this. What is that? 2 weeks, 2 years, 2 decades? Like, what's the reasonable foreseeable future? You're suffering intolerably. What, like, so if I get a paper cut, or if I like, you know, what counts as this? So I'm reading the bill and I'm going, you could argue on all of this. Like, anyone, it doesn't say you have to be of this age. I could qualify. So I was already in a lot of sucky situation then. So I went to try and get access to it. I was denied access to it. I got locked up in a cell, as we talked about before the podcast. I talk about that on my YouTube channel. That sucked. But that was a big game changer for me, for going, you know what? I'm not eligible currently, but it's possible. It can happen within my lifetime. And so that's when I jumped on to lobbying or writing to politicians, and now making YouTube videos on the subject. So that was the start of getting involved in this.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's amazing story. I mean, what other better way can you like have great information on something than to experience it? Not that you need that, but personal experience, or, you know, is always great. You know, just kind of like my brother killed himself, you know. So it's like, if anyone ever comes to me like, oh, did you ever have a family member kill yourself? Or as if that's an argument, you know what I mean? I can still say yes, but I would never, you know, bring it up. But I just did. So no, but that's interesting. That's a way that you're attempting to keep up, you know, updating your application, or whatever you call it, or pursuing that. That's awesome, because it just shows there's a need out there, and people are interested, or there's just interest in general, you know, by writing people and doing things like this as well, of course. Did that moment ever make you think that you wanted to be like an activist? Do you like consider yourself an activist, or doing activism in general, or is that kind of something that's too extreme sounding for you?
I think that the word activist is kind of a gray area to some extent, because it's like, where do you draw the line between a non-activist and an activist? Like, I would say I am an activist. I'm not going out there putting posters up outside and whatnot, and I'm not like knocking on people's doors. But I think just even the act of making YouTube videos, it's an action. It's about raising awareness. It's not like you're standing on the street corner on a soapbox, but it's, to some extent, it can be even more effective than standing on the corner of a street box, because your audience is massive potentially, and the shelf life of a YouTube video is pretty much as long as YouTube as a company continues existing. So yeah, I would say I am an activist.
That's great. Well, I hope you keep it up, because it's you have great arguments and great ways that you express the arguments against pro-life people, for lack of a better word. But yeah, Danny and Amanda, I think you had a question too, or we're gonna just round table this and take turns. We'll see how this works out.
Absolutely. Danny, would you like to go first? Up to you. You're muted, Danny.
Oh, okay, I got one. Do you still support waiting periods for those who are mentally ill? If so, how long should said waiting periods be? And what requirements should be expected of the mentally ill before they get green lighted by MAID?
This is a really good question, because this has been such a point of contention amongst different people within the right to die, those that support it. So in the past, when I first started talking about the right to die, I was really only thinking about my situation. And so for my situation, it would have been appropriate to have a waiting period because I would have had no problem. I would have been like, okay, I can hold out. But the reason behind my request for the right to die isn't the same as everybody else's, right? Like somebody who's dying of cancer, for example, or somebody who is just tired of living, or, you know, whatever, someone who hasn't even, whatever, maybe they're just like, I'm old, I've lived enough, who knows? So since then, what I've learned now is that we can have different tracks for different types of people. And so I know right now, the track right now might be, okay, people who have mental illness are all categorized in this track, right? There could be sub-tracks within that. I'm not quite sure. Because, for example, like if, let's say I just have mild depression, right? Let's just say I have mild depression. Technically, it's mental illness, right? And then there could be somebody else that has something that's different, but more, it impacts them more severely, right? It might not be appropriate to make that person wait, and it could make things worse for them, right? And the other thing too is, if they're suffering, it prolongs their suffering, and it could be unnecessary. It could have no difference in the long run. So it's a tricky subject because for some people, it could be the difference between life and death. And life, I know that not everybody agrees about whether or not life is valuable. I subscribe to the idea that there is value in life itself and that it is something that's worth protecting. So I think that if there are things that can be done to help a person, I think it's really worth trying. Like, for example, if I went to the dentist and I had a toothache, right? I don't want the dentist to jump straight to pulling my tooth out. If they can do something to save my tooth, I'd like them to save my tooth, right? And it's similar with life. Like, a person might not be aware of everything that's out there in terms of helping them. Maybe there's a way to get free housing, right? Maybe there's a way for them to get free housing. Maybe there's a way where there can be work that they can do or something valuable that they can do for society for recompense, and they just haven't found it yet. So I think that there's value in a waiting period. And I know that there's a lot of people that are just like, there should be no red tape. I don't want any red tape. Perhaps there could be a different track for people that, like, there's no red tape. Maybe I don't know. I'm just thinking on the fly here on this one. I know this is a really tricky subject. I want to give a good answer and I don't want to piss too many people off. So I think that perhaps maybe there could just be something where it's like, hey, would you be willing to wait and explore options? Perhaps that could be a question that's asked rather than forcing people to wait. Maybe that could be a better way of doing it. I don't know exactly what the best way is of doing this. The main thing for me is focusing that we're actually moving forward on the subject and advancements are being made. So I said this before on my channel, I'll say it again here. If the right to die gets legalized without a waiting period, I'm not going to be upset. I'm going to be glad that we made steps forward on this. But if it got legalized and it did require a waiting period, selfishly, admittedly, I'd be okay with it because I could handle it. But I know that it's not going to please everybody because I've had people comment on my channel and say to me that that they disagree with waiting periods. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. It's not an easy answer to give, but I have to be honest from my perspective on this.
Yeah, good answer. I'm of the school of thought that there really shouldn't be people should not be segregated based on their condition, like whether they are mentally ill, life weary, or just want to die, or terminally ill. They should have the same rights under the law. And that is why I think it's so important to promote the right to die as a basic human right, a constitutional right, so people won't be segregated. But it kind of brings me to my next question, because we're talking about death, what about life? When we're talking about waiting periods, people who want to procreate and bring life into existence, they have no stipulations. I mean, you can be a heroin addict and have children, and no waiting periods, no requirements of any kind. So I would like to ask, should there be requirements for people who want to have children, such as mandatory parenting classes, mental health and drug screenings before they can earn the right to impose life? Because we live in a world where the will of the imposition is not respected, but the imposers are. You know what I mean? The life creators, not the products of that life.
The imposition is not respected, but the imposers are.
The imposers of life, our parents. You can have children anytime you want, but if you want to die, your feet are held to the fire. Sorry, I kind of went a little on a rant here, but go ahead.
I completely agree with some sort of checks in place before you have a kid. I saw this great meme, and it was you need a license to go fishing, but anyone can have a kid without any checks in place or whatsoever. And I think that there should be. Absolutely. It's a huge responsibility. While I was in the shelter, I saw people getting pregnant, and I was like, how's, what's, and I don't mean to, it's a super complicated subject, and I don't mean to be like, oh, you shouldn't be, it's people are going to do what feels good. And maybe what they think is right, or they're working with the best with what they know. I agree, though, that there should be at least some sort of competency test or something. The thing is, as soon as you get into that territory, people are going to go, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like selective breeding, but for humanity.
Eugenics.
Eugenics. Yeah, people are like, oh, that sounds like eugenics. And they get kind of scared. It's like, that sounds like communism or whatever it is. So it is a very complicated thing. The deeper you get into it, because it starts to get mucky. How are you going to enforce that? But the general premise, I think, is really good. Raising a kid is no small task. And just the other day, I saw this 60 Minutes interview where they interviewed this girl where there was 15 kids inside this household. They had never left the house. They had been in the house their whole lives. One of them was 22 years old. They did not get into full detail on what happened to them, and I'm really glad. It's heartbreaking to see what happened, to see them. They were emaciated. They were locked up in chains. They couldn't speak right. One of them, their arm was like a nub because they weren't being fed enough food. And this girl escaped. She got through a window, and she had a phone with her. And they were smart enough to take pictures, and she ran out. And the very first person she got to see in real life was a cop, because she called 911, and the reporter, or not the person on the phone, got a cop out to her. And when she spoke to her cop, it was the very first time she spoke to somebody else outside of her household. And she was 19 years old or 17, something like that. And the body camera footage shows her talking. She hadn't taken a bath in like a year. And so all of these details, right? I know that this is a sad story, but I think it just is firm evidence to support some sort of preventative measure. I've said this on my YouTube channel. I'll say it again here as well, that we focus way too much on damage control measures and not enough on preventing bad things from happening. I'd love to live in a world where nobody feels suicidal in the first place, right? Wouldn't that be great? But I think that within the reasonably foreseeable future, we can't prevent all of them from happening. But so that's why I support the right to die. But this, what you're bringing up, Danny, is an argument that it's on the back of my mind. Putting measures in place to prevent suicidality from occurring in the first place, and having more checks and balances or some sort of work done before the children are born is part of that process. That's a big battle, and that's like a big hill to die on. And so I've kept that one as a separate. I'm not going to go die on that hill. I'm focusing on the right to die, but I am with you on that. I do support preventative measures in place to ensure that people who are creating children are ready for it. And one more thing I'll add, in the Philippines, before you get married, you're required to go to a family planning seminar or some sort of a couple of seminars to teach you skills to make sure that you're well equipped to have a solid family, because there's no divorce there. It's like it's a full-on commitment. It's a big deal, and family is very important over there. So just it exists over there. So something kind of like that exists over there. So it's possible. Okay. Thanks for the question. That was a good question.
Oh, no problem.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that, is where it's like, even in the best conditions, you're a multimillionaire, the parents are just the sweetheartest, they're sweethearts, they're adorable, their whole life goal is to have a kid, and they would do their best job at raising them and all that. But it's like the kid's life and the risks you're taking by them existing and coming into life is a gamble that's still, even the most richest billionaire, most ethical person is still going to never be able to control the effects of that risk that they're imposing on the kid. And like, so by default, when the kid is born into an existence, fundamentally they should instantly have that human right of the right to die. And of course you could talk about, like you were talking about, which is great, different steps to take, and it's all should be subjective and geared towards everybody's specific situation. But it's the fact that even we're here, we should be granted that right to exit peacefully, if we see fit. So just tacking on to that.
I agree.
Well, Anton, first off, let me just start off by saying it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. So thank you so much. And, I think I can speak for all of us. We really, really enjoy your YouTube channel, and it's just excellent content. So, my friends that I have spoken with over the last few years, in Canada, have been extremely excited about what's been going on with MAID laws. And it seemed like, a year ago, the battle was over. You'll sign up for it, and we'll have to go through this or that within 2 years, no matter your diagnosis, whatever you got going on, you're going to be able to end your life, and the battle is over. There was much celebration, I remember, a year and a half ago. And now it really does seem like things are in this strange, murky place where certain things that should be happening are not happening, like this 5-year review that you've made several videos about. Before we started recording, you talked about this sort of like new mental health app that's come out. And it just seems, by appearances, like maybe the buck is being passed. And instead of this actually coming to true fruition, all kinds of strange little things, half spoken, mostly unspoken, are happening behind the scenes, that are going to prevent this from really happening. And it's been a tragic thing to kind of watch unravel. And it's also a bit hard to follow, from here in Chicago. So I was wondering if you could just give like a little bit of a rundown of what, in your eyes, what is the current state of MAID in Canada? And before you do that, it's been officially been changed to AMAID? Is that correct?
I don't think so. I think that was just the acronym for the committee. I don't know why they picked AMAD, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'd love to know about just your thoughts on sort of where it's at right now, and also since you made your last video, has the Senate done anything to do this 5-year review that they had promised to do?
Not that I know of. So the responsibility is on, I believe, the elected government to get this committee up and running. It's not even necessarily have to be a committee in that respect. Maybe it does have to be a committee, but all I know is that in the 2016 made law, it was written that every 5 years they would have a review. So they could, they could say, well, technically we did have a review, even though they only met like 3 times. They did have a review. I mean, one could argue it's like they got nowhere, like they were just getting started. Okay, so just to clarify some background information. So, okay, I should explain here. So, okay, 2016, Jody Wilson-Raybould's the Minister of Justice at the time. She writes this law. It's pretty vague. It's not very detailed, but it's a law in its infancy. And so what the responsibility from that point on is on everybody, both the politicians and the people, the citizens, the voters, everybody, to interpret this law, because it's open to interpretation, and to help our society get a more detailed law or a better law. And so people have sued the government since then successfully, multiple court cases. And then you've got people writing letters to the government. You've got, of course, people voting for who's going to be in governments. The nice thing about the 5 years is that you're going to have a change of government between most of these. I think every single one of these, because the government is only voted in for 4 years. So we get an election between each one of these reviews. Okay, so 5 years goes by. It's 2021. That's last year. We have COVID-19. COVID-19 screws everything up, and the government keeps using it as a scapegoat for not doing things. You can't blame COVID-19 for everything, but that seems to be what they do sometimes. But yeah, so they late in the year, they finally get this review going, and there's lots of things that need to be talked about. Now, one thing I want to point out is that before the review was started, as I mentioned, some people had already sued the government, and I think there was people with there was some disabled person or a couple people with disabilities, and they weren't considered to be dying in the reasonably foreseeable future, and so that was considered to be unconstitutional. The reason it's so vague, so they had to take that out. So they had Bill C-7. This time we had a new Minister of Justice. What's his name? Oh gosh, I forgot his name. It doesn't matter because he's only in temporarily. There's going to be another one in after the next 5 years anyway. So he introduces Bill C-7. It takes away the whole reasonably foreseeable future thing, and then it creates a 2-track system. You got a track for people who are imminently dying of cancer, for example, or something like that. And then you've got another track for people who are not imminently dying, somebody who's like wheelchair bound or something like that. And that's the basis for their suffering. You have to be suffering intolerably according to the law. That's still, yeah, I see you shaking your head. Yeah, I agree. So anyway, that's still in the law. They're not opening it up to just anybody. So not yet. They haven't done it yet anyway. At least they're not doing it yet anyway. So where was that here? So they got the second track now for people who have disabilities, and that law gets put into place. And then after that happens, during that time, they explicitly state you are denied access to medical assistance in dying, or how I would say it, you're denied the right to die in a peaceful and painless manner. Just for the people who nitpick and go, technically you do, okay. If your sole underlying condition is a mental illness, that right there pissed off a lot of people, me included. And but when that got passed over to the Senate, Senator Stan Kutcher I remember his name because I'm really glad to see what he did. He said, let's put a sunset clause on that. And what that means is it's like a little countdown timer is ticking off next to it. And they proposed a 1 year or a timer, I believe. And then the Senate's job is to make amendments and propose changes. And they can just put their foot down and say, no, we're not passing this. And that's our government's pretty dang has difficulty with being efficient with its time anyway. So and there's people waiting for these bills to go through. Like there's people who are like, come on, like I need this, please don't delay. So the Senate doesn't want to put their foot down unless they absolutely have to. They send it back to the people who are voted in. Big difference between the Senate and the people who are voted in. The Senate's not voted in; they get appointed. So they don't necessarily need to be popular, which is kind of a cool thing. That's one of the tricky things about democracy, right? Who are you going to vote for? The candy salesman or the dentist? So then it goes over to the candy salespeople, and so they get this thing, and they've got their countdown timer of 1 year, and they go, let's bring that up to 2 years. And I'm thinking, this is awesome. They actually passed it, even though 2 years, it's like, oh man, 2 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things. I'm glad that that's in there. So we're still in that 2 year time period of waiting for that clause. People who have mental illness being denied access to medical assistance 9. When that countdown timer expires, that line of text is, I from my understanding, is just void. Like I'm no lawyer, okay? I need to kind of point this out. I'm no lawyer. I don't have a full understanding of the law, but from what I understand, that's going to be void, and then it's up to speculation. So right now, things aren't necessarily like doom and gloom here, and I don't think it's like we were making progress and then now we're going downwards in progress. I think what's happening right now is par for the course. This is not a popular subject, and politicians have to be popular in order to keep their job. And so they don't talk about this very much, and it is getting swept under the rug, and they kind of do pass the buck on. And so they're passing the buck on to their future selves, because they're still going to be the same government in 2 years. We're not having an election between now and then. So they have to do something by then. I think they're aware of that. What they do, we don't really know. And I think that they are ill prepared to come up with good legislation. For all I know, they could just say, let's just rewrite the same line of text with another sunset clause and add another 2 years or 3 years, and then the next government can take care of it. That could happen. We don't know. But I want to say this, and you guys, I saw this as one of the questions that was you're proposing. It's up to each and every one of us to hold our government's feet to the fire, to take action on this. And that's part of what we're doing now. But yeah, okay, I'm done. That's my answer. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for all of that. No, I mean, that really elucidates so much of the whole process and just the current state of it. So yeah, thank you so much. Let me take sorry, I have to kind of look over the questions a little bit. So Kevin, if you want to go on to the next one, I didn't have much to follow up with that. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, that's okay. It's hard when this, I understand this is the evolution of policy and considering these hard issues that everyone has to do. But it still kills me to think of like how many people are suffering waiting in line, how many people are in this long 2 year line and they're just dying off, right? Because they're still committing suicide. So it's so tragic, and it's a good way that maybe we could emphasize about how like the blood is kind of on your hands, by the more that you stalemate this thing or sludge through the mud, people are still doing what they've always been doing, and that's dying these tragic deaths. And the frustration is just, I couldn't imagine how painful, because it's like just they're dangling the carrot kind of right there, and everyone's chasing it. They're like, oh, you can't get it though, but we have it, it's and I know they can't fast track something like this. It's a big deal. I get it. But I always go into just that thinking of just, man, some people are paying a heavy price in order for them to be taking their time on this.
I completely agree with you. And this is what I wrote. I wrote this to the Senate and to well, I can't remember who else I wrote this to a lot of politicians. Same type of message. All the murder suicides that are happening, how many people are dying of opioids, but they're not doing it accidentally, they're doing it on purpose because they want access to a drug, and it's on the black market, right? People want Nembutal. People want a lethal dose of morphine, right? If they can't get that, and then we find out that there's this drug flowing in from offshore that'll kill you if you sniff 2 grains of salt worth of it, and it's an opioid and it shuts off your pain receptors. That sounds like a peaceful pill. And it's spreading across Canada, and it's an opioid, it's a tragedy, it's what was the crisis? It's a crisis, it's under the veil of COVID-19 currently. And who knows how long COVID-19 is going to happen, but it's still going on. My provincial government talked about this, and they said, we can't just keep talking about COVID-19. We got to talk about the other stuff too, because there's other things that are going on. Like, we can't just constantly have 100% of our front and center loaded with COVID-19. And then of course you got people who are jumping in front of trains and this and that. And I saw, I see conflicting information. I saw this statistic or whatever, suicide rates went down. And I go, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I saw another one that was saying that suicide rates are up on people jumping in front of subway trains in Toronto or something like that. And I'm going, okay, well, I don't know. I'm not really too fixated on whether or not suicide rates are going up or down. That's to some extent not 100% relevant to fighting for the right to die. I do agree with you all that it should be a fundamental human right. I think that it should be legally recognized. It should be recognized in the law. You have this right, it's protected, and we're safely allowing it. Anyway, what you were saying, Kevin, about the damages that are being done by denying people this right. People talk about the slippery slope. You may have heard me say this too, that when they were talking about the projections of the future of all this damage that can happen from legalizing the right to die, that's arguments that are being made against us. The people who are making these arguments also need to consider all of the pain and suffering that's happening right now, because there's a legal barrier denying people access to the right to die in a peaceful and painless manner. And so you need to counterbalance that together. It is complicated, but it's something that's worth thinking about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. And it's sad, because people always, they'll just put whipped cream on things that aren't really yummy, right? Like, they'll proclaim that, hey, we got a death with dignity though, like all these problems are solved, like we fixed this problem. And they haven't looked into it for a second, and they don't realize like there's 4.3 million people in Oregon, and only 200 people per year take the death with dignity pill. It's not because people don't want to die. It's because there's so much, 99% of people don't have access to it. But we all think, like, we've created this law, it gives you the pill, and that's great. But I mean, 200 people per year to do it is not that I want people to pass away, but most of these people are dying of a chronic, really painful illness. It's not philosophical or anything too much. But so many people deserve it. But sorry, yeah, a little side subject there.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah, of course.
You and Kevin and Danny, you guys met or talked about this subject in some sort of philosophy group or something like that. Is that right? Or how did you guys get into this topic?
Geez, I've been into it since I'm about 18. I remember I had a friend kill himself, started the subject. I was actually working full-time in a church before I became an atheist, and a lot of theists were saying, you're not, you're cowardice, to take your own life, and it's the most selfish act ever. And it sparked me to think about it all forever. And my depression helps fuel that, interest. I'll be honest. But me and Danny met a year and a half ago ish or something like that. I don't know where or how, but I think it was in a philosophy group. Yeah, and we just became friends and about talking about it. Yeah.
Like we share a similar philosophy. We actually believe that coming into existence is a harm because, you did mention David Benitar, right?
I've talked about him.
Yeah. Are you familiar with his book? What's it called?
Better never to have been.
Yes, the better to have never been, the harms of coming into existence.
I'm not familiar with the book, but I've watched and listened to him talk about this subject. I listened to a debate between him and what's that guy, Jordan Peterson? You know Jordan Peterson? I listened to a debate between him and Jordan Peterson on this, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Let's listen to that. So the good thing about that is that they dumbed down the argument a lot for me, for the general audience, because the picture, it's just audio. The picture shows a quadrant system, and it's the premise. I guess it's like a simplified version of David Benitar's argument about suffering in life and not suffering and not life, and how the equation shows that it's better to not exist in that quadrant system. So yeah, I know a little bit about it, not super 100%, but I know a bit about it.
That's called the Benitar's asymmetry. And so Kevin and Danny and I are what are called antinatalists. And so I've been involved in the antinatalist community for 10 years, and Danny and Kevin for 5, 6, something like that. So we kind of all know each other through that. I think it's safe to say. So if you're very interested in the ethics of procreation, I think it brings into focus pretty immediately the ethics of being able to get out of and once you're here. So they're very related topics in a lot of ways. If you believe people should have the right to die, well, you probably need to examine bringing people into existence in the first place, where they're going to come here and be in need of a right to die. And so they just sort of they're almost like brother sister topics in some respects.
Has Maid ever used the term human rights to describe their position on the right to die? Because I think that's a very important word to use.
I agree with you that it is a human rights issue. I don't think that the Maid legislation talks about this necessarily as a human right. I'd have to pull up the bill and do a control F search for human rights on there, but I don't think it's being talked about like that so much on the legislative branch of the government. But I think we're all aware that this is a human rights issue. Like, we know that it is, and they're not really using that terminology in the bill. I think maybe they're hesitant to describe it in that way. I'm not quite sure like how to say this, but like, I agree that it is a human rights issue. There's the new thing that I'm seeing comments, or a comment recently was just like, I posted something on Reddit, and somebody said that it shouldn't be medicalized. I also listened to an interview on the Peaceful Pill podcast, or not, it wasn't an interview, sorry, a talk, where they were talking about how he doesn't think you should be giving the power to doctors to make that decision on your behalf. You should be able to make the decision for yourself. And yeah, I agree, it's a human rights issue. And so I've thought about this. I thought, well, am I doing the right thing by trying to get us to continue making steps forward on this? Or should I be going back and going, okay, we're going in the wrong direction right in the first place. We shouldn't be talking about this in a medical assistance in dying kind of way. We should be talking about this in a human rights thing. what I have been doing is I haven't been going back and trying to correct the course into more of a human rights discussion. I've been just sort of kind of interweaving it with my critiques of the way we're going currently and continuing to go along. So maybe in the future, rather than us like going, okay, crank it back here and let's quit with this whole the doctors make the decision, the psychologists make the decision, and just turn it in this direction. Maybe in the future we'll lead over in that direction while continuing to move forward in the direction we're going currently with medical assistance in dying law. I don't know exactly. I can't predict the future, but yeah, human rights needs to get brought into the discussion. I'm trying to do that as well as you are right now with bringing up the question. So it's worth talking about that. It shouldn't be overly like medicalized as some people are pointing out.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially in the sense of like people should have that right, whether they're suffering or not. If they could just say, hey, I like the idea of, because I don't know when this bus is going to crash, and it's going to be a really ugly crash for most of us. I don't mind the idea of just kind of, ringing the bell. And, once I get to a place in life, once I've experienced any, lots of positives, there could be positives or goals or passions that you want to complete and projects or whatever. And you get to a place where you've done some things that you feel like you've, reached the end of that or for whatever reason, it doesn't even matter, but it's about your life and what you want to do with it. But to me, that prevention idea should be enough for to get your right passed and get your prescription or whatever, because the idea of that is an ever looming fear that all of us face of when is it going to happen and how is it going to happen and how ugly. And that just scares me to death. It always has. Is this the day I'm going to get, run over by the semi truck drunk driver or not? I don't know, but I surely don't want to go through some things that I've seen so many people go through, kind of like your story about those kids, held captive in their home. Like, it's just tragic. It's avoiding the tragedy is all I'm saying, dodging the bullets, and prevention is clearly a good in that regard. And just changing the perception of people's thoughts about that, because that should be our big mission. Is people think it's cowardice and selfish and all of these crazy reasons why people commit suicide if they're not chronically ill. And the irony is just like, but if you bring someone into the conversation that's terminally ill with cancer, they got 1 month to live, they're all full of cancer, or instantly people gather empathy. They have the ability to gather that empathy for them in that context. So why can't they in other contexts about just your vision about what life is? and the value that you place on your own life, that's not respected, but the suffering are respected in a sense that it's a consideration. But even all that aside, you should just, as an idea, or you don't even have to have it be an excuse. You know what I mean? When you apply for your fishing license or whatever, the guy's not saying, why are you getting your fishing license? What is it? What's your goal here? No, he's just like $5, sir. Okay. Anyway, little rant there. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think that you bring up a good point. The whole it's cowardly and whatnot. Sounds like propaganda to me. Oh, it's cowardly. It's you're a weakling or whatever. That happened when I was at a job recently, and they were talking about something like that, and somebody said that's cowardly, and I go, it kind of takes some balls to put a gun up to your head and pull the trigger. That's not cowardly. It takes some courage to do that. I think that's just some propaganda to get people to shame. How shameful is that? It's casting shade at people because they put a bullet through their head. Like, what's wrong with you? Don't subscribe to it. Stop promoting that stuff. Anyway, yeah.
Well, that leads me to just ask a question about what your thoughts are about groups like suicide prevention and the way that they kind of twist the idea of what life means into this kind of insulting, condescending thing that if you're suicidal, you need help, and you're this like, troubled little injured rabbit that needs help. And, to me, it feels that way. But anyway, what is your thoughts about suicide prevention and
Okay,
general?
so one of the things that I try to do is I try to entertain the other side of the debate, and I try to incorporate the thoughts, and look at it from their point of view. Because you're not going to grow if your vessel is already full to the cap and there's no room for more information. So you need to empty the vessel, actually fill yourself with the message that they're trying to give to you, and then take it in. And the thing is, here's the thing, is one of why we're afraid of doing it, because it might change us. But that's the whole freaking point. The whole point is to potentially get changed as new information comes towards us. So the argument that you're, a scared little rabbit that needs to be saved or whatever kind of thing, I think that could be true in some cases. And the thing that I would criticize a group like that for, now I should point out, to preface this with, I don't really have much experience with an anti-suicide prevention group kind of thing, with a suicide prevention group kind of thing. I haven't really experienced with something like that, with the institution anyway, like that, other than the healthcare system. But taking that approach and that perception of people who want to die, and then blanket coding that across everybody, that's the problem. I think that there lies the potential for such people to exist, for people who want to die, but they can be saved, or maybe they just don't know what kind of support they can get. I think that those people do exist, and I hope that they get the help that they need to live a good life. So yeah, I think pretty clear on that.
I can't see why both can't exist at the same time, right? Like, people want to fight for different methods of therapy for someone that's struggling, and say, hey, here's an option, try this. This is an option, try it, And people, or even have that part of the process of a death with dignity is like, hey, you gotta see a therapist first. You're 12, you just broke up with your boyfriend. Like, sorry, you can't. Like, I understand that side of it. Just say, hey, you need to take some steps towards this and that, and getting treatment. And someone might, because I've had friends that just take a tiny dose of Prozac, and they really feel better. They're just like, oh my God, this is just like the most amazing pill. Like, So great, cool. And I'm just saying, it can't, there's no reason there can't be parallels of road there, that both are happening at the same time.
Yeah. Where do you draw the line on being firm with the person and saying, no, you got to wait, or going, okay, this person is on the other side of the line, we're not going to make them wait? That's a tough a tough decision to make, right? Same thing too with like an age limit, right? I think you're not going to find a whole lot of people that are going to say, if a 7-year-old kid says that they want to die, that would you just give it to them, no questions asked. So again, you need to draw a line somewhere. I mean, if some people go no line at all, some people say, no, I don't want any line at all. And I'm not like that at all. I'm not like that at all, because this is this is really tricky. I'm sure that there's some philosopher out there that has crystallized these thoughts. I tried talking about this on YouTube before. I think I deleted the video because it's hard to talk about. It's kind of hard to talk about, but it comes down to this whole natural idea thing. Maybe that's a good way of bringing it. It's like there's this belief that the nature's way of doing things is better than man's way of doing things, even though we are just an extension of nature, and that the whole concept of natural versus unnatural is just kind of like a concept, almost like a fictional concept that we just create. There's no objective measure of what is natural. If a guy poops in the woods, it's no more or less natural than a bear pooping in the woods. So when we subscribe to this idea of the natural way is better, it's almost better to just take your hands off the steering wheel. Because as soon as you get your hands on the steering wheel, you're mucking up the natural way. It's not natural anymore. And when I look at legislation, laws, rules, things like that. That's like someone's hands on the steering wheel, and they're specifically turning it. And the tough thing is that we're all on this bus together, and someone's at the steering wheel, and not everybody's going to want to go make the right turn at that next junction. And so we can't please everybody. There's going to be a couple people in there that are going to say, what, you're denying a 7-year-old kid from accessing it? That's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. And it's going to be like, hey, well, if we go with what you're saying and we make a left-hand turn instead of a right-hand turn, then all these people are going to be pissed off. So no matter which way you cut it, you're going to be pissing off some people. So I think that there needs to be a line drawn somewhere. Where that line is, I don't necessarily know the best place to put it, because I don't know how, but I know that I'm sure that some people are going to get pissed off with this line. And if they have their way and there's no line, well, then other people get pissed off. So yeah, that's.
Can I give you an example of a line?
Sure.
And ask you where you would draw this line. This is just fun. We're just having fun here.
Okay.
You made a video about the homeless, and it was really powerful, honestly, and describing how these people should have an option. So it was a great video. I recommend people to check it out. Where would the line be for that if someone was homeless, sleeping, in 5-degree weather in the winter? They've clearly been through hell for years or whatever, and they want to apply for it. And they're an adult, whatever, they're 50, whatever. Where would the line be? How instant would you say it's okay for them to have access, I guess? Because I assume you would say so in your video, I believe, but.
Okay. I'll throw 3 months out there. A 3-month waiting period is what I was thinking when I very first was trying to come up with, how would I visualize a law around this? And this is back in 2008. I mean, of course, some people are not going to like that idea. But the thing is, if you're 50-something years old and you've been homeless for like a decade or something like that, what's 3 months to you? It's a drop in the ocean. If you've been 10 years homeless, 3 months is not going to be that big of a long wait, I don't think. Now, if something drastically changed in like the last week or something like that, and then that's the catalyst for you deciding that you want to die, then that's different. But if it's just general malaise over the state of your existence, and you project that the next 10, 20 years, 30 years is going to be very much the same as the previous 10 years, going through 3 more months rather than 10, 20 more years until your natural death, as you're projecting it to happen, is, I think, is much better. Is it as good as getting it right now? Maybe not. But when you're weighing the scales here, it's not that much worse if you're looking at the next 10, 20, 30 years, or however long the person's going to live. So I don't know. I would say like a 3-month waiting period. I think that's fine. It gives ample time to think about it and to go, okay, this isn't just a snap-second decision. And for the government or whoever, for society in general, I don't want to say the government. I don't want to put like, oh, there's this barrier between us and them, and we're all responsible for helping each other out. We work together as a society to take care of our vulnerable people and people who are worse off than us. If a person comes forth and says, I want access to a peaceful and painless death, I've had enough, or something just bad happened to me right now, I think that as long as we give ourselves enough time to help that person, to give what we can to help that person, and try to take care of them, I think that's good. I think a 3-month waiting period is good. Maybe 1 month is better. Maybe 6 months is better. I don't know. But if I was just to spitball, I would say 3 months. That's my spitball number.
I'm more of a 1 week waiting period kind of guy. I mean, the societal default is life is intrinsically good and not being alive is intrinsically bad. When that's an opinion. It's like, what harm could actually come to a corpse? If you make like if you make a split second decision, I want Nimbital, and it's given to you and you drink it, you're dead, right? You're at where you're going to be in like 30 years. It's like, what are they going to miss out on? Missing out is something that only pertains to sentient life.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to miss they're not going to miss out on being harmed. They're not going to be able to have orgasms, but like I said, they won't need them.
Yeah.
All the problems will be solved. So it's like, that's the thing I have about like all current right to die laws. The problems is that, it just, life just keeps being imposed on people who clearly want to die. And yeah, it's like, it's really frustrating to me. I mean, I guess I'm pretty radical in this position. So a waiting period, it's like, why even have it?
I see where you're coming from to some extent. Like it's like the whole notion of just like good versus bad, right? Like it's sort of like an invention in our head. And really everything's meaningless, right? Who knows? It could just be the heat death of the universe in the long run, and all our petty squabbles are nothing but that in the grand scheme of things. If a person chooses to die, it's not going to make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of the universe. They're just dust to dust, ashes to ashes, right? So I kind of get where you're coming from on that. Yeah, I don't know. There's no easy way to reconcile, to bridge that gap on that perspective. If I were to try, I would say that part of the reason why we behave this way in terms of sanctifying life and putting it on a pedestal is that it's probably hard coded into our genes to want to live, to want to have sex, to want to help each other. And I think that's been a positive evolutionary trait to help the human species spread like a virus across the whole planet. And we want to, it's a selfish thing. It is selfish, and it's built into us. Like earlier near the beginning of our talk, I said selfishly, I wouldn't be as impacted if they put a 3-month waiting period in. And just like it's not good or bad whether a person turns into a corpse, it's not good or bad to be selfish. It's just built into our bodies. So yeah, I don't know exactly how to bridge the gap, but it definitely gets you thinking about things in a different way, for sure.
I mean, if I can just throw in my 2 cents, I mean, it's, even though I am in favor of some kind of waiting period, it almost is like the wrong question to be asking, or it's the wrong kind of conundrum like to put ourselves in, because ultimately what's needed might be a little bit on the impossible side, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be impossible. It needs to be a highly individualized, thoughtful process, for each individual person, where the circumstances are weighed, and there's certainly access to whatever the person might need, but there's always that point where you get what you want, if this is what you really want.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's almost like, yes, I'm in favor of a waiting period, but I'm kind of not in favor of any hard and fast amount of time being on the books that a person would need to go through. You know what I mean? That process of analyzing the circumstance has to come first. And I don't know what that would look like, though, because who gets to be the judge?
Yeah,
or the jury in that circumstance, and I don't really know what that would look like, and I certainly can see how that would be open to a lot of failure and to a lot of the person never getting what they want, or waiting too long, or maybe even not enough times where they feel a bit pressured to do it faster. Who knows what could go wrong in those? It's very sensitive.
You just triggered like a philosophical. This is deep philosophy here, but when you talked about who gets to be the judge, who gets to decide, it just triggered in my mind all delusions of control and the perception of freedom. Like, does freedom even really exist, or are we just all on a clock? Are we just all in a hard deterministic existence? And if that's the case, then even trying to entertain an evaluation of who gets to decide is a delusion. It's like, well, nobody is. We're all just on a hard track. But then, if you want to subscribe to the notion that free will does exist, then it matters. That's when it matters. If you believe that free will exists, then it's worth asking who gets to judge, because then you actually could have free will in that state of existence. And that's a super deep rabbit hole. I know it's a super deep rabbit hole, but it's like, that's what triggered in my mind when you talked about who gets to decide how long a person has to wait.
Well, somebody will end up being that person. I mean, that's definitely the system that we're immersed in, whether the universe is deterministic or not, which I think it is. But and maybe that, maybe that question about freedom does sort of mean that we should exit the whole worrying about what, leaving it in the hands of doctors, and maybe the more DIY mode of right to die is the right answer. Maybe it should just be, the thing that you just go buy off the. I mean, I think it should be both. So it gets a little.
I agree. I think both is actually really good, because there's some people that are going to, like, coming back out of the realm of deep philosophy rabbit hole back into the realm of reality, of like, not reality, but just more like kind of grounded, easier to talk about stuff. I think that a DIY approach existing alongside an institutional approach would probably be a great way to satisfy more people, because we've got this bus and we've got somebody at the front driving the bus, and it would be great to have a whole other bus next to that one. And then when we get to that junction and this one turns right and that people want to go left, there's one that goes left, and then it can branch off. This is something that, peaceful, I always forget his name. Philip Nietzsche, like, he was talking about in his podcast, saying he's supporting the DIY stuff. And then I saw on Reddit, and it spread around, the images of the 3D printed capsule that they designed, where you get inside the capsule, you get, just in case nobody knows, it puts a gas in there, and it's like an inert gas. You're not going to panic. It's not going to trigger a panic response. If you panic, it's something else. It's not going to be an automatic thing. That's when carbon dioxide levels rise, and your body recognizes the increasing level of carbon dioxide, and it triggers a panic response. And that's why it's almost impossible to put a bag over your head and to suffocate yourself that way. You will just innately just like rip it off. It's built, it's like hard coded into your DNA to react that way. So this bypasses that by putting nitrogen into your system instead. And nitrogen already exists in our atmosphere. Your body's not going to freak out, and you can die from lack of oxygen. It's like I'm not sure if you call it asphyxiation, but you'll fall asleep. You might feel some things a little bit before you go, but it's probably one of the most peaceful and painless ways to go. So this DIY print it yourself 3D printed thing, I don't know much about it, but it seems like it's a cheap option. It's something, maybe not necessarily cheap, but it's accessible to people. And it also, the thing about the DIY approach is it takes the power out of the government's hands and it puts it into the people's hands. Because I can download this document, get a 3D printer, make this thing myself, and say, hey, screw you, government. You don't have control over me. I decide for myself when I get to go. I'm not going through any of your processes. I'm not even going to tell you that I'm doing this. The only day you find out is when you find me in my capsule after I'm gone. And I think that's actually pretty cool. I think that it's good to have DIY options. The only thing I'm concerned about, though, is like nefarious use of it, which I think is kind of fair. Like, you don't want to have people make something like this and then they stick their baby in it. Or, I mean, like, that'd be kind of messed up. But it's so... I do think it's good to have a DIY approach for people, because then it gives the option of having a branch there. But you do have to be careful with these things. You don't want to have like what's collateral damage, right? That's one thing that I think about a lot, is like trying to prevent collateral damage. Anyway, that's my response to what you said there.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I just want to conclude by saying that I think there are consumers for both. Even in a perfect made system, I think you would be getting, there is still a need for DIY methods. So I would hope that both of those schools of thought, if for lack of a better way of saying it, can develop alongside each other in some kind of way. Yeah.
Maybe it will. With cryptocurrencies being a big thing now, perhaps people can go to a cryptocurrency market where the government can't track what you're purchasing and you just buy the stuff. I mean, that's something that I was looking into doing back in 2012, I think it was. Excuse me. I was like, I want out. I'm done. I want to get out of this. And so the thing was, I was like, how the heck am I going to get my hands on some Nembutal? It's like, I don't want to have to travel to Tijuana, Mexico to do it, even though I tried doing that later on in life. Before I went there, that's a whole nother story. Before I went there, I tried to get it ordered and I couldn't find any way to order Nembutal. And, you can't just go online and do it. And I'm not like networked hooked into, just in case any freaking person, like, let's put this guy on an electric chair. No, I'm not networked into anything like that. So I'm like, how do I get this stuff? So I found out about the deep web or the dark web or whatever. And I got into it through the Onion network and Tor network or whatever. There's like two different layers. You got to go through two layers to get in. And I got in. And then I went to Silk Road, which was a website that people would use to buy and sell drugs and illicit goods and stuff like that or whatever. So I went to Silk Road and I asked, hey, I want to get some Nembutal. How can I get this? And then I got a couple of responses like, why do you want Nembutal? What are you doing Nembutal? It's like, so I can take my own life. And then the immediate reaction I got from people was like, no, we're not going to sign whatever. I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, what? This is just a place to get high? And it's like, I don't want to just get high, and I don't want to come here to hire a hitman. I'm here to buy Nembutal. And then somebody private messaged me and he said, hey, I live in China. And he wasn't using his real name, obviously, he or she, whoever this person was. They go, I can send it to you. But I want you to know that if it gets intercepted at Canadian at the border, that can happen, just so you know. So it'll cost you $500 and you can send it to me through Western Union. So I was like, yeah, I'll do this. So I got to the point where I was at the Western Union and they have these warning labels all over the place. It's like, warning, make sure you fully trust the person you're sending the money to. And they've had issues with people getting scammed. And I was like, I don't want to just like throw away $500 at this guy. And it made me change my mind. I was like, I don't know if I can trust this guy. It's just some random dude I met through Silk Road who lives in China. There's no way for me to hold him accountable. And he said to me that it can get intercepted at the Canadian Customs Office. So I bailed on sending him the money. And I didn't do it. And then I went to Tijuana to try and buy it there from a veterinarian clinic, and I got denied. They were like, no, they caught on. Back then, 2008, they were writing in the Peaceful Pill Handbook that people were traveling to Tijuana, Mexico. And I think people were also traveling to Chile to get Nembutal, because those are two countries that were rich enough for people to own pets, but loose enough in their legislation to allow foreigners to buy this stuff. But they caught on, and the veterinarian said to me, he can get in a lot of trouble if I get caught taking this stuff back across the border. And and the thing is, he knew I was lying. I told him it was for a dog. I was like, it's for my dog. And he goes, he's like, well, when you take it back, bring your dog in. Bring your dog to me and I'll give it to your dog. But yeah, I definitely see the draw on wanting to take the power away from some external decision maker and make the decision for ourselves. And I speculate that this is one of the reasons why we have an opioid crisis, is that it's a way for people to die in a peaceful and painless manner with a drug that they can get from the black market, and the government's not able to stop them. I think that that's one of the reasons people use that.
For sure. I think you're probably 100% right about that.
That's interesting to know, though. Yeah, of all the attempts the these roads people go down are pretty scary though, when they're trying to find ways to exit life and the dangers they
Yeah.
can come across trying to get there. Scammers is a maybe a lightweight problem that some people might have. Some people might end up on a dark alleyway somewhere with the, you know what I mean?
That could have happened when I went to Mexico. It could have happened to me. I went down there and I was in such a vulnerable state.
Yeah.
Like I was I was desperate. I had a fair amount of cash on me and I didn't speak the language. And I when I was heading down there, I was at the train station and I saw a random Spanish dude, Mexican dude. I came up to him and I said, "Hey, do you know how to speak Spanish?" He goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Do you have some free time for the next hour?" And he's like, maybe. Like, I go, "Okay, I'll give you some cash if you can just translate for me. Here's $100 or something like that." And he was
gotcha.
like, and it's like ka-ching, 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 ching. He takes me down. He goes, "Oh, just one sec. I got to stop at the music store to buy a guitar for my relative or whatever." And he started talking about his family. Like, I don't give a shit. Just take me to the vet, man. Like,
But see, it's just like drugs or something, right? Like marijuana, right? The second it's legalized, all the dark webs, all the black market stuff, all the crime, all the gangsters and mafia people involved or whoever just disappears. It's like a fart in the wind, it's gone, And that's just the same thing with legalization with this, I mean, obviously it's going to be controlled to a degree of like, yeah, it's not next to the bubble gum at the grocery store, but like it eliminates all of these desperate attempts that people make trying to do this, and that alone is a great argument on our side, I would think, is to, I mean, even it, but no, I mean, I like the idea though, too, of having this neutral party that is within the law, but they're still doing things to have it the best way possible that we can have it, other than controlled substances or something, like the narco thing or Sarco thing, or or like Switzerland. If you're rich enough, you can go there and you get it done. It's all legal, and but if there was more of those, if there was more supply, because we know that the demand's there, so we should just be building more facilities.
There's a demand for carfentanil. If there wasn't a demand for it, then it wouldn't be all over the place. And so there's a need. And, if we want to live in a free market capitalistic society, who's going to service that need? Same thing with the prohibition of alcohol, right? There was a demand for alcohol. There was a need for it. And so that's why we had bootleggers and people producing it secretly on these islands and whatnot.
Well, Anton, so I've long believed, and I'm sure I can speak for Kevin and Danny, that like there really needs to be some kind of revolution in how we do this activism. Like there needs to be more of this, there needs to be more people on the street talking about it too. Like Kevin is doing some of that stuff, lately, which is awesome. There just needs to be more activity. There needs to be more young people involved. There needs to be more art around this. Perhaps it needs to become more part of our narratives that we write, that we put on Netflix and various places. It needs to go really far as like how much this becomes a part of the culture. And so I'm just curious what ideas maybe you have about how this can move forward into the future. We've talked a lot about how it can move forward legally, but as far as how it can move forward in terms of how just the regular person fights for this, go ahead, go for it.
Tons of ways. There's tons of ways, and it's happening. It's happening, and I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Just today on Reddit, let me find this. And here's the crazy part. This is a Reddit that's a screenshot of a tweet. So on Twitter, this person posted this. They go, I don't know if you can read that. Is that backwards on your screen?
No, it's good.
Oh, it looks good. Yeah.
No suicide. I can't read it. It's backwards on my screen. Can one of you?
Sorry.
No suicidal shit or whatever, but sometimes I look at the world and I just don't feel like participating.
Nice.
Yeah. And then look at how many retweets that has.
Yeah, it's definitely a sentiment that you find all over the place now. Yeah.
It's become, people are becoming more comfortable bringing this up. And then so that was reposted on Reddit. And at the time when I saw it, it had 18,000 upvotes. And who knows how many people downvoted it, right? So it's happening. The change is happening. We are a part of the change. We're a part of this wave. I think that there's definitely a need for it. And I think it's sort of naturally happening. I think it kind of is. Anyway, what can people do? Like in terms of a practical sense, talking about it's wonderful. Raising social awareness is the beginning of social change. Making it okay to talk about it, like it wasn't, remember, how people have to come out of the closet, right? Like, because they had to hide it, and I heard Kevin talk about this as well, like coming out of closet, talking about this. You mentioned this, I think, your very first podcast. And this is a good thing to do. Watching these things, entertaining thoughts of it, every little tiny thing counts towards this. And then on the hard side of things is gathering money to hire a team of lawyers to sue the government. And that works. As we've seen here in Canada, it works, and it can work. Those court cases, there's been multiple court cases that have succeeded, and it has forced the government's hand.
Yeah, very well. Can I actually ask one follow-up question to what you just said? I don't mean to take time away from Kevin and Danny. You guys are okay with so just about that about doing some suing. So one thing I find really confusing in regards to the wording around who can or can't access MAID in Canada has a lot to do with like with disability in general. So this is maybe this is just me being confused, but in the US at least, there are mental health conditions that are indeed considered to be disabilities. Like, for instance, you can have schizophrenia here in America and be considered disabled, be on SSI, get disability, be recognized as a person with a disability who can't work. And that's a whole status that's, protected. And so does Canada have a similar system in place that recognizes disability, specifically around these kinds of conditions, just using schizophrenia as just an example? It just seems that like when many of the senators or people that you've mentioned in your videos say the term disabled, or refer to people that have disabilities, they only seem to mean those with physical disabilities. And without perhaps saying so explicitly. So some mental illnesses are already acknowledged as, so are certain mental illnesses already considered disabilities in Canada? And are those conditions not being unlawfully negated under these rules? And would that not be a ground for a lawsuit? Because it kind of sounds like they're saying, well, you are disabled, but it's a mental health disability, so you're not really disabled.
Yeah.
So, and that's taking away what should be a protected status anyway. There legally shouldn't be any grounds to question that and make that separation whatsoever.
You make a really good point. And I think maybe there's room there for someone to sue the government on that. I'm glad that you said that. I never really thought about that before, but you're right. Can a mental illness be considered a form of a disability? I mean, and why the distinction between physical disability versus non-physical? Your brain is just as real as your liver is. So it's, it is physical in a sense. Mental disability or mental illness is a physical illness. So the distinction is imaginary to some extent, or at least the distinction is vague. So where do you draw the line? Is Alzheimer's a disability? So I think you bring up a really good point. And so maybe I'll talk about this in a video in the future. And part of what I'm doing when I talk about stuff is I'm sort of like hoping that somebody who has enough money to hire a lawyer, or somebody who is a lawyer, catches wind of some of this stuff and then takes it to court. One of the things I prepared in the background here before I started chatting with y'all is this guy named Joey Arvey. He was a lawyer here in Canada, and he fought in the case of the Carter versus Canada case, the one that sparked this whole MAID legislation from into being created in the first place. And I've only seen the pictures of him like this, right? Like, videos of him like this, pictures of him like this. And when they when Bill C-7 came out and it said that people with mental illness are denied access to the right to die or access to MAID, a TV news network interviewed him, and he came in, he was on a wheelchair. I had no idea the whole time the guy's been in a wheelchair, and I didn't know. And so he was included in this in the new legislation because he has an obvious disability. He's in a wheelchair. And then they asked him about his thoughts on the exclusion of people with mental illness. And then he just flat out said it's unconstitutional. It's discriminatory. He goes, someone's going to sue the government over this. And then the reporter goes, will you sue the government over this? And then they hand the microphone back to him, and he's like, I might, maybe. But you could tell that he's like so burnt out on
I can understand. Yeah,
he's an older guy, and he's dead now. I don't know what happened, but he's not around. So there was that. He was one of the. I was like, oh, I hope he does. And then I found out he died. I was like, he's not around to. So hopefully somebody does. But I like knowing that a guy who is a lawyer, who has sued the government in the past multiple times, has succeeded in his cases.
Yeah,
said himself, someone's going to do this, and he even said he might do it as well. And that's another piece of evidence to support that this is possible, and hopefully it will happen. I think it will if we continue pushing for it.
Listen, in my limited understanding of the differences between American and Canadian law, I mean, if disabled people already have similar protections as they do in America, then yeah, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. This is clear discrimination. This is making people who already should have the right under the language of MAID to jump through hoops. I mean, it's disgusting.
It's discriminatory.
Yeah.
And what's happening too, kind of funny enough, is that people who are disabled are arguing that it's discriminatory against them to give them access to MAID. And I'm like, you guys have it all backwards. I'm able-bodied and I want this right. And you're saying it's if anything, it's the opposite of ableist. It's like, so they're saying it's discriminatory against them. And so I wrote to the government and I said to them, I go, if you just legalize this for people like me, able-bodied people, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on and say that it's discriminatory against them. So, and the funny thing too is, and I mentioned this in a previous video, is that this person said the disabled community is against this. And here I am with evidence of a guy in a wheelchair who fought for this right in the first place. The disabled community, it's not like every disabled person is on board with fighting against this.
Yeah.
You had disabled people fighting for this right, and yeah, I don't know. I'm a little leery about giving credence to the institutions that are saying that the disabled community is against this. It's like they're trying to make themselves sound bigger than they actually are. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Excellent.
You're welcome.
Yeah, wonderful answer. I had no idea that Canada did not consider mental illness a disability. So I'm pretty surprised.
I got to interject there. I don't know if that's the case. It could be that if you have a mental illness, it's considered a disability. I don't know much about that, to be honest. So it could be that it is, but it doesn't seem like that's the case when it comes to this right. So I wouldn't jump in and say that it's not considered a disability just yet. I don't know if that's exactly what's like the legal definition or whatnot. Anyway, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's great stuff, guys. Thanks. That was really great chat there that I had nothing to do with. That was the best part of it. No, just kidding. I mean, I don't really think. Is there a question you have, Danny, on your list that you want to ask? I don't think you've asked all. I mean, all of yours, have you? I don't want you to miss out or anything.
I'll throw in a fun one. I know this is a serious conversation. Excluding religious ones, because we all know where they stand on the anti-right to die thing. What are some of the most absurd anti-right to die arguments that you've heard others make?
So I'm really glad you asked this. So I was just saying to Amanda that I need to make a new video talking about this one argument that keeps coming up. It's kind of annoying to me, but it's that it's like the technically nobody stopping you thing. And so, yeah, if people keep bringing this up, you have the right to die. Technically, nobody can stop you from dying. It's like, technically, we don't have the technology to give you a pill and turn you immortal. Not yet, anyways. Can you imagine a world where you could do that? How many people would you be forcing people to be immortal? Would it be an option? I don't know. But so that argument, technically, nobody's stopping you. And so, in other words, why bother fighting for the right to die if it already exists? The right already exists. There's no need to fight for it. Well, we've got legislation in place that acts as a legal barrier that blocks people from accessing it in a humane and peaceful, painless way. So I would describe it as like being in a hotel room on the 5th floor of some building, and you say, I want to leave the room, and then there's somebody in there with you, and they go and they lock the door and they block the exit, and they say, no, I'm not going to let you pass me. And you go, just let me out the door, man, get out of the way. And they don't. And then you say, okay, you're forcing me to stay in this room. And then they say, well, there's a window right there. So technically, I'm not forcing you to stay. Because if you really wanted to leave the room, you could just jump out the window. So I guess you don't really want to leave the room, do you? That's what, go ahead.
Well, so, that, I mean, that's a perfect example. And it reminds me of like the anti-abortionist, it's a tantamount to somebody who is anti-abortion and say, well, technically nobody's stopping you. You have a flight of stairs, you have coat hangers, you know what I mean? So,
that's yeah.
Really sick logic.
Yeah.
It's excellent metaphor.
Yeah, it is really good, and it's the problem is just that I keep going back to perceptions, but it's true. Like there's the death with dignity exists in let's say in a state where this conversation is happening. It's in the back of their mind where they're like, oh well, it's death with dignity. Like, so you already have a peaceful exit if you're terminal and things are really hard on you, you can have that option. But it's like, they don't, and they're still, but they're minimized. They're just, it's, I think, of one of their rationalizations for forcing you to jump out that window and just being like, well, I mean, you don't have cancer or terminal illness, so somehow we get to dictate how much suffering is enough for you, what your threshold is for pain. And it's just an insulting, condescending attitude, even if it's unintentional. Maybe that's subconsciously kind of just what's happening, and for us to point it out and stick it in their face and say, no, this is what you're doing. You're the, you're the warden here, not me, is important for us to do.
Yeah, exactly. And to Anton's point, you really don't want the right, you don't really want to die argument it's even more absurd because all these horrible methods that people use, it's not comfortable. We got very fragile nervous systems, and that keeps people alive because, I mean, a lot of people don't want to have to resort to putting a noose around their neck or something like that, something painful.
It's a sucky way to die.
Absolutely. We want to prevent all the shotgun deaths, the hangings, and all the gruesome deaths as possible. And the slippery slope is not having the right to die, because more people will continue to end their lives. And, I mean, there's people who are willing to light themselves on fire to do
Yeah.
it. Just really sad.
So I just wanted to quickly say that I really did love your video about the slippery slope, not just because you brought to light this David Benitar paper, which is like a little bit on the obscure side. David Benitar's views on coming into existence are far more well known, but his views on the right to die are not, there's not that much content out there about it. And it's an excellent paper. I just wanted to say that. I mean, I think, so long as Kevin and Danny agree, I think we should maybe put a link to that, in the description, because I'm sure people would appreciate having, greater access to it. So thank you for, shining a light on that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for showing appreciation for it. I'm glad. I need that kind of feedback to know which values to keep, because I produce a lot of videos that never see the light of day. And then even a lot of those that do see the light of day get deleted after a while. I'll go back and I'm like, I don't want, I'll delete that. So
yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're a content producer that produces a lot of controversial material. And the three of us are content producers that produce a lot of controversial material. And, sometimes that material does bite you back a little bit. And sometimes it's worth it. And sometimes maybe not, so I totally understand that concern.
It's tough here too, because like I said, I live in like the Texas of Canada. And so if I'm at work or something like that, and somebody asks me, what I do in my free time or, whatever, I can't really, I don't want to give specific details because I'm worried about it impacting my employment.
Sure.
So I hope that changes. That's something that I think we are just right now, us talking about this right now, we are rolling out the red carpet to allow people to talk about this stuff without having to worry about getting fired or getting some reprimanded in some way for bringing up a taboo subject. We're fighting for that, and we're taking a slight risk in talking about it. And it's good that we do this. There needs to be more people like us doing this.
100%. I mean, we talk about it all the time. There are people all over the world in desperate situations, in really, horrific political situations, desperate to have this conversation. And that does put, I don't want to call it pressure, because it's an honor, and it's a pleasure for me, honestly, to be able to do it. But I'm just saying it does put, we have to make the effort to have this conversation as much as we can. All of these, very important ethical conversations that are so overlooked, because hopefully, if we can now, hopefully it means that they can later.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. It's kind of just like, I don't know. It's so weird how this is, even though it's legal in some states or whatever, it's just, you literally can't talk about it almost anywhere. And in a way, because people can always come up to some weird assumption that this is a cry for help, or you're saying you want to die or whatever. And it's just like, no, I'm interested in the subject. I'm interested in preventing another million people to die a horrific death this year. And you should be too. You should be too. We all should. I mean, if we treated all this as on the same lines as we do identity politics or any kind of like modern issues of today, and it was on the front line of every sort of cultural, and like influence, shit would get done quick. I would think. I would hope. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's great just to have these conversations and the ideas that we're all talking about and agreeing on, and that's it. But yeah, that's my point.
That sounds good. It's been very validating to watch your YouTube videos and to listen to the three of you talk. It's good to get that sense of validation as another content creator talking about this stuff. Because now I don't feel so alone. Not so alone. I like, okay, there's some
Good.
other people doing this, and that validation's really helpful. It is.
Yeah, and it's I bet there's people that are feeling just utterly completely alone and wish they had some sort of source of other like-minded people just to hear, not even talk to, but even just like a podcast like this, like while they're driving or running or whatever, being like, oh, okay, like I'm not so crazy. It makes people feel, yeah, you feel less crazy, because when you have a culture coming to you about every time you bring this up, you're crazy, or you have issues, or what's the problem with you, you start to maybe believe that, or it is me. Am I thinking crazy? Is this actually crazy to think about not wanting to participate in this game?
That's gaslighting.
Yeah, completely.
Your microphone's muted, Amanda.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say exactly.
Yeah.
Just
saying,
agreeing emphatically.
Danny? You're saying something, Danny? I think.
Oh, I said exactly, I think. And
they both. we're all in agreement.
Okay.
I'm so glad that we can, help you not feel so alone, and so many other people too, because there's a lot of people out there thinking, well, I'm the only one, As in other countries, I'm in the middle of writing actually 2 letters. Another letter is going to address the fact that over 2 billion people live in countries where attempting suicide will get you thrown in prison. So that's another issue. These people cannot speak up about the right to die like we can. So in a way, we are privileged that, we're not under threat, as long as, I mean, there's stuff that I guess we could say that would get YouTube after us or something.
Yeah. That's the thing too with there's a right to die subreddit on Reddit, and you can't talk about methods. You can't, share information on how people can DIY. So that's why you got to turn to the Peaceful Pill. Those guys are helping people with the DIY stuff.
That's a perfect thing to change. What we're doing is so important. It's just like for so many other people to stand up and talk about how silly these other people are being, and how shallow their lip service of concern it really is. And they want to force other people to live for their own, like, because they don't like the idea, they don't like just because they're not comfortable with the way they feel about the idea of someone doing some awful, death. It's they do all these things to prohibit people, and like, no, we should stand up and be like, no, it's okay. It's okay to think thoughts. That's really all we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to have a conversation with you. They want to shut you up.
Yeah, I think that there's like multiple types of people inside of that umbrella, though. Like there's like people who are driven to shut down the conversation, and then I think that to some extent, like if I get a message on Reddit or something, or YouTube sends a letter saying something like that, I think to some extent they're trying to cover their ass so they don't get sued. And I would do the same thing. I mean, if you're a big company, you don't want to get sued. So I think there's a little bit of just complying with the law to just like how we're not spelling out, XYZ, this is where you go to get this and that kind of thing. It's just a part of the reality we live in. We can't really do that. But yeah, there are people who want to just shut down the dialogue. And then there's people who rally to it. I think it's just the path of least resistance. If you're surrounded by people that are anti-choice to this extent, like if you're in a biker's gang, you're not going to say, hey, why don't we change to blue bandanas instead of red bandanas? You get your ass beat. So if that's I guess it perpetuates itself inside certain groups. But those groups, I think, are the minority. The extremists groups that are against this right like against even talking about it, they exist in a grander pocket of society, in a grander scale. They are a subgroup in a bigger group. And I think that just like that tweet that I showed you with like 44,000 retweets and the discussions on Reddit and us now, we're emerging to the surface. And so now you've got that one person that wants to switch to a blue bandana, and they're looking around, they're seeing lots of other people wearing blue bandanas. It's a little bit easier to make that change, maybe leave that group or convince the group to change.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And, I think the best way to go about the right to die is through forming a social movement, having it, from the grassroots level.
I'll just add on to that is another reason why it's important to have groups like us is like we are the only, I don't want to say only, conversations like this though aren't the kind of conversations that like Compassion and Choices is having. They're really concerned about terminal illness for older folks and legalizing this, this state or that state, which is great, but having conversations about this, or it's like, defending people like that any age, these people should be validated and be respected, that their opinions matter, and instead of being shut down and saying you need help, call this number, that doesn't get anywhere. And I hope that we're giving people that kind of solace and just consoling them psychologically enough to feel like they're not alone. So we're actually, doing prevention work here. The suicide preventionists should like us in a weird way.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if the preventionists would focus on other things, I think the suicide rate could potentially go down. Like if they focus solely on anti-bullying or helping the poor, or coming up with ideas that can create more equality, more of an open conversation. Yeah, I bet the suicide rate wouldn't be as high. But I think also a lot of people, they're already depressed, they're already sick, they don't feel validated. The world tells them they're crazy. And then they see these numbers pop up on the screen. And I think that could trigger people to just want to get it over with, because they are so sick and tired of having preventionist propaganda in their face all the time.
I think it's also going to, when this happens, I don't think it's an if. When this happens, I think it's going to motivate our society at large to do a better job of taking care of problems that have been around for a while, like homelessness, like child abuse and things like that. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to play out, but I think it's kind of similar to the way where if you're an employer and your employees are quitting, that's a motivation for you to resolve the problems and because you want to retain your staff, right? But by denying them the right to quit, there's no motivating factor. You can be the worst boss in the world. They can't quit. They're slaves at that point. Same thing with the housing crisis in Canada. If the population declines a little bit, then banking on the property of houses constantly going up is not going to be a sure bet. And if that causes a crash and causes wealthy people to lose money, then I think they deserve. I think they deserve that. I mean, that's how they validate the fact that they're making money for free. It's like, well, we're taking a risk, right? Bullshit, you're taking a risk. If people are denied the right to die, where's the risk? Give people the right to die. Then you have a risk. Then it's like, okay, well, people are a little more likely to not go into $1 million in debt to buy a house than they were in the town that they were born into, or, it's almost like serfdom to some extent, the way I look at it. And anyway, sorry, I know I'm kind of going, I took what you said, I'm kind of going off in a different direction with it, but I think when this happens, it's going to motivate our society to do better in some respects.
I mean, for what it's worth, I do think you're right, because a society that can honor the individual's right to die at the time of their choosing is a society that is dealing more honestly with suffering in general. And so a society that can do that and can have that kind of compassion is, I think, on a good track, at least, to having compassion in a lot of other circumstances. And so I do think it will go a long way into making that clear in a lot of other circumstances, just how badly, just how much people have to deal with, and how wrong it is. Yeah.
It also gives bargaining power to our most vulnerable people. It's like having the option to get out of a sucky relationship, you know. It's popped into my head earlier. People would say, "Oh, that's cowardly. That's weak of you." You wouldn't say that to a woman leaving an abusive relationship. That would be such an awful thing to say. And yet we'll say that to people who want to kill themselves. That's ridiculous. But it's giving bargaining power back to people. Like, one of the reasons why, one of the good effects of having the ability to get a divorce is that you can hold that person accountable to better behavior and ensure that you're at least getting a fair deal out of that relationship. Same thing with employment, but not so much with just like living in the country that we live in. We don't have the option to, you can go hide in the woods and then maybe get an infection or something, or freeze to death or something, but that's just a terrible option. Shoot, there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot what it was. Oh, I'm really glad that I got to talk with y'all. I thought about talking with y'all before. I had imaginary conversations in my head. I was like, oh, I'd like to talk about this kind of stuff like that. So it's good to be able to sit here and chat with you, the three of you.
Yeah, us too, for sure.
Yeah.
You're welcome anytime. You bet.
Oh, absolutely. It's been an absolute honor to have you on, and thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Please subscribe and follow Anton at his YouTube channel. We will have his links in the show notes wherever you are seeing or hearing this. And yeah, please give him much attention, as he deserves. It's been a great honor to have him around today. So thanks. So I guess see you later. Have a good day, right guys? Say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
And hopefully you'll come back again, and we can further the discussion.
Yes. Have a good day. Thanks so much, guys. Take care. We'll see you on the next episode.
You have been listening to the Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed your time and found the information valuable. Please visit us at therighttonolongerexist.com to learn more about our organization and mission statement. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at The Right to No Longer Exist. There you will find links to our individual channels as well. If you would like to contact us directly, please email info@therighttonolongerexist.com. Thank you for your time, and let's remember that during the time that it took to listen to this podcast, dozens, if not hundreds of people endured a horrific death by suicide. Let's fight together for a world where this doesn't happen anymore. See you next time on the Right to No Longer Exist podcast.